Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I am joined by the lovely David Wragg. How are you today, Dave?
I am okay, thank you. I mean, if I'm honest, I'm currently enjoying a sinus infection, but if
Oh,
I'm
those
going
are
to try
brutal.
not to blow my nose for the next hour or so.
No worries. No worries if you have to take a moment. Your
Yeah.
health and your
Well, at
comfort
least,
come first.
yeah, I'll mute the microphone so you're not all deafened. That's at least my promise to you.
The joys of a summer cold, right? They
Yeah,
say it gets better in the summer. I don't really believe them.
no.
So, thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited for our chat. We have a few things we're going to dive into today, but could we start with can you do an introduction of yourself and your books? Because you've got four to introduce to us today as well.
Certainly. Yes. So my name is David Wragg. I am the author of the Articles of Faith series and the new Tales of the Plain trilogy. So, well, in fact,
Extraordinaire.
I'll do you one better. Articles of Faith started in 2019 with The Black Hawks, turns to camera. That's my debut. And that was followed in a slightly COVID delayed The Righteous in 2021. That one's a bit fatter. So if you enjoy a longer book, I recommend that out. And now we have, yes, The Hunters, which is out in glorious hardback and brand new paperback as of the 4th of July this year. So you can get that in either flavour. And as arrived yesterday, this
Oh, exciting.
is book two, The Company of the Wolf, part two of Tales of the Plains. So I got my copies of this yesterday. This is out on the 29th of August in ebook and hardback. The audiobook is slightly delayed thanks to scheduling snafus, but should be out a few weeks after that. I would describe the books as low fantasy or low rent fantasy, depending on where you set your markers. Sweary stab fantasy is generally where it gets termed. So, yes, it's full of bad language and bad people with occasional rays of hope.
Occasional, just a few. And in terms of what you hope readers will get out of your stories, what do you hope they walk away with?
Yeah, this is a good question. I like to think I think of the readers, but if I'm honest, I kind of write the books to amuse myself. So the
Hey.
first reader of all of these things is me. And what I'm trying to do generally is make myself laugh. Um,
Mm.
that's so what I hope is I can make the readers laugh, but not in a kind of over the top zany way, more in a way of I enjoyed that story and there are some funny things that people said along the way,
Mm.
and I can't believe that person said that thing after that thing happened.
I can name a particular character to that one,
Yeah.
and at least in The Hunters.
Yes, and I'm afraid they do get worse. The new book, Company of the Wolf, introduces a new character who has a certain way with words. In fact, there's probably two characters who have particular ways with words. And then the third book, there's another character entirely. I introduced an entirely new point of view character for the third part, really just so they can say some fairly unpleasant things.
That must be the fun part of writing your own stories. You can do these
I
zany
love.
moments and just get these crazy characters in there as well, make
Well,
yourself laugh.
I mean, it really all goes back to my motivation in writing the Black Hawks originally. I
Mm.
mean, I had the idea for Black Hawks. I can remember talking to my wife about it in the days after we got married. So it was 2009. We got married in Spain, yeah, largely because it was so expensive to get married in the UK. Um,
Really?
yeah, it's just her cousin lived up in the Andalusian mountains in southern Spain, and we found that we could actually get married at the hotel down the road from her cousin's house for less than it would have cost for a big venue in the UK. Big venue, medium-sized venue. Come on, let's not
Oh,
sugarcoat it.
yeah.
But I can remember in the days the halcyon days of after the wedding when everyone had gone home and it was just the two of us. I can remember saying to her, "I've had this idea for a book. I think this would be
Mm.
quite good." I was reading a lot of fantasy. I always had read a lot of fantasy, so I was always going to be writing fantasy.
Mm.
And it was about there's a guy and he's thinking there's a beggar and the beggar's not who he seems, and she was very encouraging. She said yes dear, looked up from her margarita, right? Yeah. um and
The
she
picture of
tolerated that.
supportive partner.
Yeah, so that was 2009. I didn't actually then start writing the Black Hawks till 2015.
Okay.
But the original motive, I mean, a lot of other stuff happened in the middle. But the original motivation was I want to tell my own twist on a classic fantasy story
Mm.
where I've read quite a lot of, I don't know, po-faced fantasy, I
Okay.
suppose. Where it's not, I wouldn't call Tolkien po-faced exactly, but it's sort of high fantasy ethos where everyone's kind of noble. There's lots of big speeches
Mm.
about this, that, and the other. And I had been, working by that's 2009, I was 30. So I'd had already quite a storied, checkered career. And I continued to have a checkered career freelancing for the next few years after that. And I just had this notion of, although you see the kings and the princes and you see the sort of the great armies marching across battlefields and noble people doing noble things, all that twist of everyone's incredibly cynical and they're all Machiavellian schemers, because those are really the two ends of it, aren't they?
Yeah.
But in the middle, you've got to have a load of people who aren't particularly noble but aren't particularly ignoble, and they're just trying to make a living,
Yep.
and things are against them, institutionally, systemically, probably in terms of personality, let's be honest. But
Yeah. Banned from taverns and
yeah,
whatnot, you know?
but they're having a go. And
Yeah.
the notion of the Black Hawks was taking the sort of the industry I was working in, which was like freelance software development, and saying, what would, if you took the notion of the great mercenary companies and you transpose that to freelancers, jobbing freelancers working in an unsteady industry where your reputation is kind of all that you have, but often the things that happen that affect your reputation are completely outside your hands. And then what if you accidentally stumbled onto the biggest job of your career and didn't know how to handle it and just sort of kept your head down and hope for the best, which was essentially the storyline of Articles of Faith. I mean, the
Yeah.
main character, Chell, he is there more to, let's say, he's a passive protagonist, but he is generally not in control of events.
Mm.
And the Black Hawks themselves are initially a very imposing bunch of mercenaries, but what you realize the more time you spend with them is they are just people trying to make a living who are in a now over their heads and don't really know quite how to deal with the momentous sort of world breaking saga that they're now caught up in.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of just have the normal day Joe trying to make his life and go about it, and
Yeah,
then, oops, wrong door.
yeah.
Sorry, didn't
But
see anything.
it did give me a chance to write lots of sort of double meaning gags about like freelancers and untrustworthy,
Mm.
shiftless, can't be trusted to turn up on time, bring their own gear, etc. All of which is sort of also true for freelance soldiery in COD medieval terms. The notion that somebody turns up to do a job, somebody else pays them slightly more not to do the job, so they just turn around and go home. That kind of thing. The professional
Yeah.
ethics.
Yeah, ethics had a whole different term or meaning in that, scenario, but it's interesting that you kind of brought your experience as a freelancer into that, along with the jokes and just the everyday sort of chum going about his life, in terms of blending that into the story and capturing that sense of humor and, I guess, realistic view of that
Mhm.
point in life. How did you balance that in a fantasy world while also trying to bring in that inspiration from your own personal experiences?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I started with the fantasy and then sort of applied my own attitude over the
Mm,
top, I guess I'd say, certainly for the first series. The
mm,
world that I created was A, to serve the plot, but B, as just because I was trying to be too clever. And this is really the story of my career and indeed my life, is generally trying to be slightly too clever. And if I just dial it back a bit, things would go a lot smoother.
mm.
Um, I was looking to subvert as many fantasy tropes as possible.
How
Uh,
many did you count? How many did
I
you get
didn't
to?
I didn't keep an actual running list, but
Okay.
the goal that I had was to sort of not to send up in a kind of a mean spirited way, but to take classic Tolkien inspired quest fantasy, the notion of
Mm,
the farm boy discovers the plot at the heart of the evil empire, meets a mentor character who shows him the ropes, goes on a journey with a ragtag bag of misfits, faces down the great evil and saves the kingdom. That is where, you see interesting places, meet interesting people, avoid death in a number of places. But that's your basic fantasy quest.
Mm.
And so I wanted one of those where the pattern, the structure of it was the same, but every aspect of it had been flipped as you went. So the main character, Chell, is not the chosen one. He
Right.
has no abilities beyond some very strongly held opinions. And the central tension of that whole series is how many of his opinions are wrong and how many
Mm.
he might actually be right about, even if he doesn't have the experience to back it up. Similarly, the mentor character is an incredibly cynical / pragmatic, depending on your attitude, freelance mercenary who appears to have all the answers to things. But again, without wishing to give too much away, by the end of that series, it's really him questioning how much he knows about
You have a
how much
fan
he
there.
knows about the world. Yes, hi Steve, and then you have Lemon, who is a character. Lemon is one of the mercenaries. Lemon has her own perspective on everything, which I think is unique, possibly certainly to the book, possibly to all of fantasy, and indeed nearly anything that's ever been written. Lemon is technically a tourist. She's
Okay.
she's just passing through. She's doing a grand tour and has decided to join in and tell everyone where they're going wrong. So,
I love that many of these characters have just a smidgen of stubbornness to them, if is
yeah.
what it sounds like.
Well, the trouble is, if everyone is cooperative and open to new ideas and generally very good at sort of ameliorating conflicts,
Mm.
then you don't get a lot of drama. If somebody proposes a plan of action and said there's only
Yeah.
one thing for it, team, we're going to have to march up there and save the kingdom, and everyone else goes, yeah, I think so. Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
a really good idea.
Yeah,
And
let's
somebody else
let's
says,
take that army of 10,000 people with
well,
us.
yeah,
They're all
well,
agreeable.
what?
That's fine.
Yeah, well, yeah. What if we, I don't know, did like a leaflet writing campaign first or something? Like, oh yes, that's a good idea. Yeah,
Yeah.
let's bombard them with propaganda. I think that might work. But yeah, you need a
Mm.
degree of discord in the original sense rather than the god awful chat app. But you need people to disagree, and you need people to
Mm.
have not fixed ideas, because that's boring if people have the same argument over and over again, as indeed I found, because that's what I continually wrote. That was a large part of the editorial feedback for the second book, is why are they still arguing about this? They were arguing about it in book one. I'm like, well, yeah, because they both still
Mm.
feel the same. Like, that's not character growth.
Yeah.
We need to address this.
So,
Fine.
how did you balance that then, being able to get the character growth without making them feel out of character?
Well, that, I mean, in some ways, good editorial feedback helps enormously. It is a learned
Yeah.
skill, I think. The first draft that I wrote was obviously far short of the final book, but there were some
Mm.
parts of it that were completely unchanged all the way to publication. I'd say, I don't know, 65% of all of the words I wrote were completely unchanged,
Okay.
but then the rest of it needed to change. So I have a lot of, I'd say, good writerly instincts, and I definitely
Mm.
would say that they're better now than they were. And there were some things
Okay.
I could write and go like, yeah, this banter, that's golden. Yeah,
Mm.
this setting, this description, this is pretty good. I'm pretty happy with this. And
Mm.
then you'd look at the story as a whole, or you'd say, why does this character never learn anything? Or you'd have any of these other
Right.
slightly delicate, pointed questions and go, oh yeah, I didn't think of that. I was lucky in
Yeah.
a sense that the editor I worked with did not spare my blushes,
Mm.
and the experience of editing that book and then editing the second. I mean, I'm making it sound probably worse than it is, but it helps put different things into your mind, because for me, writing is, I'm not going to say instinctive, because I'm an inveterate
Mm.
planner. Like, before I'll start writing any prose at all, I will have a full outline. I won't do this, character descriptions and world descriptions beyond a fairly detailed notes document, like a kind of what would be termed a world Bible, but that implies it's a lot more in depth than it really is. This is not a comprehensive document. This is more like a
Mm.
list of places I have mentioned, along with 3 words next to them of what I mentioned them as, and building up as I go along. But I
Right.
will spend 3, 4, 5, 6 months possibly planning a book before I start to write it, because I need to know what happens, when it happens, and how it happens before I
Interesting.
can actually write anything. Because otherwise it feels like a waste of time.
Right. And I'm guessing you found that out the hard way.
In many ways, I did. I mean, one thing, so between 2009 and 2015, I wrote another book, and
Oh,
that I will
okay.
call, that was my learning book. Um,
Right. That's in the
that was
vault.
like, yeah, yeah. That was an incredibly important experience for me. I mean,
Mm,
I did probably every single one of those like list of elementary mistakes made by first-time writers.
right.
You know, starting with a dream, having a character look at themselves in the mirror to describe themselves, not knowing how to transition a group of characters from one scene to the next. So you have to
Mm,
describe how they walk to the door, and they open the door, and they walk down the hall, and they go down the stairs, and they stop at the second doorway, and they open the door, and then they go down those stairs, and then they get in the car and they drive up the M1, take the second turning, etc. forever.
mm.
You know, you can have 16 paragraphs, and then what you learn you can do is you can have a character say, "We should go to that place," and the next scene is that place.
Right.
Oh, you can do that, and you don't confuse readers. No, no,
Yep.
readers expect this. They are perfectly
Yep.
capable. And once you start paying attention to how transitions are handled in
Mm,
other books and in films and TV and everything else, cut to exterior shot, bang, away we go. Phone rings.
yep.
What? I'll be there. Bing, they're there.
Yeah.
They didn't show how they got there. They slam a car door and walk out. Oh, okay, that they came by car. All right. There's
Yeah.
a lot of ways, things to learn about how to approach these things. Where if you've never done it before, you are
Yeah.
writing and writing, and suddenly, like, I don't know how you're supposed to do this. I write my way through it, and that's how you end up with a book that is 240,000 words long, as my first book
Mm.
was, um, of which
Wow.
I guess 80,000 words was the actual story, and the rest was just people picking things up and putting them down and walking from place to place.
But a good learning experience nonetheless, because that also helps you
Yeah,
with descriptive writing.
exactly. I mean, it
Yeah.
was vital. I could not have written the Black Hawks if I tried to write it first. It would have been a
Mm,
disaster. And to give my younger self some credit, I was aware of that. Although I'd had the idea for Black Hawks in 2009, I didn't want to try writing it first because I thought it might spiral out of control. So
right.
instead, I tried to write something which I thought would be lighter and shorter. And
Okay.
yeah, 240,000 words later, which, I mean, to give you an example, so this is a 150,000, this one. So it's sort
Right.
of another 100,000 on top of that. So that will never be published. And
Yeah.
it has some stuff in it, which I think, like, that was quite good. I did that quite well.
You
That
could pull
character
from it.
was good. But yeah, I think there is no way you'd ever turn it into anything worth publishing without wholesale rewriting. And if
Hmm.
you're going to wholesale rewrite something, then you might as well write something new.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think it's important though what you said where you kind of you have it on hand, you have things you wanna pull from it because I've heard some authors who say, "Yeah, just gone. I delete it's gone." It's like,
Yeah.
"Okay, but that was so much time. There could be things in there you could use," you wanna hang on to that even
Yeah.
if it's just, "Hey, you know that old story? How did I do that? Who was that? What was that scene of can I pull from that?" Um, it's one of those things where you talk about our authors talk about, these are the resources I use to learn how to build my writing, hone it.
Mm.
Old stories that maybe you want to keep to yourself are the same thing. They're tools in your little tool bin.
Yeah. And a lot of it, I think, goes to kind of shaping the way you think, like
Okay.
how you approach things. And this is what I meant, I guess, about writing instinctively. When I plan out a book, I'm not writing a sort of meticulous bullet points of sort of, this is everything that will happen, this is how blah 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 blah. What
Mm,
it tends to be is, these are the set pieces, these are the revelations, these are the pivotal arguments, because I do plan my books generally around arguments.
okay.
This will be the moment where this character says the thing, and
Okay.
the other character will then react to that, and from there this will all happen. And then it's just sort of filling in the gaps, if you like. It's sort of, for that to have happened, then we need to have shown this, and we need to have
Mm,
seen that, and then so I'll need to show, and then it's sort of the building blocks of stuffing things in here and there and there.
right.
And eventually I should have a fairly clear idea in my head of what the story looks like, but the outline is to keep me on track, to help
Mm.
me not forget stuff that I've thought about in advance, cutting
Yeah.
lines for a character to use at a pivotal moment, or uh, don't forget to mention in this scene that that character was wearing this particular thing, or had had just come via that, because we'll need that later. Chuck in some
Right.
mentions of this thing. And then when it comes to write the scene, I'll have to be sort of furiously reading my notes. I'm like, right, okay, I need to keep all of that. And then I need to write the actual scene. And if I'm
Right.
lucky, I'll have thought about where it's taking place, what it looks like, and then just be going, oh, and in the room there was a blue kettle. And the person picked up the blue kettle and said, I don't think we should do this anymore. And there was a sharp intake of breath. And then you just carry on. And I get to the end and I look back at my notes and go, oh, completely forgot to mention it. And then I've got to go back and add some
Right.
lines.
And that's a bit of accountability for yourself as well to kind of keep you on track rather than trail off and end up
Yeah.
somewhere you don't want to be in terms of the
Yeah.
story. Yeah.
Which is exactly what happened in my first book. It was full of,
Yeah.
oh, we'll get to that bit and that'll be a cool thing. And then
Side
they'll go to this thing. But there was never a reason to go beyond the story needed them to go to the next place.
It could have
And
been
so
a
you
side
find,
quest.
but I would find as I was writing characters, I'd have a group of characters in a place and they'd gone there for something and they got there and they'd achieved the goal. And then there was
Yeah.
no secondary goal. There was no sort of, oh no, it, what do we do? We need to, and
Right.
I knew the person writing it was like, well, now they all have to go, they got to know to go to the next place.
Yeah.
How? And so I would write scene after scene of people wandering around going, well, what do you think we should do? I don't know.
Right. There was no productivity in it.
It's a lot of words. And so I wrote
Yeah.
some quite good scenes in terms of descriptions and, people kind of making character observations and that sort of thing. But ultimately you could have 3 chapters, which essentially could be boiled down on a single plot point of they decide to go to the next place.
Right.
Or they are
Yeah.
forced to go to the next place by whatever, which again would have been a better bit of outlining. So the advantage of trying to outline books subsequently is to see the kinks in the plot, to work out, this leads to this, to this, to this, to this. And I try to write fairly pasty stuff. I mean,
Mm.
Black
Yeah, I'd
Hawks,
say so.
the Black Hawks was a direct reaction to all the stuff I'd written before. Like, it's savage
Right.
transitions. Someone will mention the name
Mm.
of a city and then you'll cut to that city. Like, it's
Right.
barreling along. Very light world building, I would say, which again, some people have said not enough world building. I would say that some of it was taken out in the edit. Again, that was
Right.
the editor and I decided what kind of book it was. And the
Okay.
idea was light world building, low fantasy. So I had, some descriptions of things in there. I had references to this, that, and the other. And it was all
Mm.
like, this is not central to the plot. It's got to go. So,
Right.
just got red lined. I'm a bit more verbose these days. I would say, ironically, that part 2 of Tales of the Plains, it's still, so it's quite pacey. It's still, quite short scenes, quite to the point, not a lot of dwelling. However, it all takes place in one location.
Mhm.
And there's an initial sort of inciting incident. And then there is a kind of a slow boil of tension that ratchets up steadily over the course of the book, leading to what
Mm.
appears to be an inevitable conclusion. So it's quite a departure for me. And it's something I'm quite excited about. I think it is the best book I've written. Certainly, it's going to be published.
And that's what you hope for, right? As a writer, when you're doing anything, you hope to get better and better with each one that you work on, each one that you put out.
Yeah,
And I would
and
say
that's
that
where
those transitions are a little bit more natural in terms of The Hunter, because I've read The
mm,
Hunters, where those transitions from scene to scene or place to place are much more natural compared to what you're describing in the Blackhawks,
yeah,
because they do talk about it. They do have the, "Oh, we gotta pack up and get going," like, "We gotta move," you
and
know?
there's a sense of impetus, at least I hope, a sense of impetus, a sense
Yeah.
of purpose, and a real kind of one thing that I've learned is, the clear stated goal. And even
Yeah.
if you as the writer are like, they're never going to get there, but they're going to think they are, they're going to say they are, and then events will divert them. And then we can't
Mm,
do that goal. This becomes the new goal. Oh no, now something else has zigzagged us. Now we're going to go this way.
right.
So the reader with the expectations has still got a clear idea of like, what are they trying to do? How are they trying to do it? Oh no,
Mhm.
something's happened, but maybe there's another way they can still achieve that goal. So you're in that
Right.
kind of, the reader is not just going, I don't know what anyone's doing anymore. Why
Right.
I thought they were trying to go to the museum. They're now like they're in a cable car. I don't, what's happened? So they're
Yeah,
kind of
you
giving
gotta
the
put it
readers a
together.
chance to catch up. Yeah, turns out it's quite important. Again, I have learned this.
Well, and that's wonderful, and thank you for sharing it because I know that, many authors watch these interviews as well. And these are the kind of things that you either figure out for yourself the hard way or you hear about from different authors and you kind of take what works for you. And that's why I love hearing about authors' processes as well because everyone's is so different. The big
Yeah.
learning curves were very different for everyone because how they go about telling their stories is going to be different as
Mm.
well. In terms of your inspirations and talking about your own reading, if you could, share with us some of the stories that helped inspire you to come to this idea of, "Hey, I wanna write about, these random guys just living their lives and whoops."
Yeah. This is, yeah, this is an interesting question because I think I was drawn to fantasy in early age. I
Mm,
couldn't tell you if it was, I mean, it wasn't Lord of the Rings, but I know that I read The Hobbit, or yeah, my dad read me The Hobbit, me and my sister, when we were on holiday in single figures. So the kind of the idea of, hobbits and elves and dwarves and
mm,
things was there as background. And growing up in the 80s, there was a lot of kind of secondary Tolkien stuff,
right.
that initial wash of sort of 80s Tolkien-esque fantasy, and then the
Mm,
90s stuff that came after it, which I hoovered up as a teenager.
mm.
I remember doing English GCSE, you had to keep a book log of just everything you'd written. And
Oh,
I was
wow.
just in and out of the library all the time, churning my way through absolutely everything I could get through. And a lot of it, delicately put, wasn't very good.
Right.
It was just anything with elves in it, anything with goblins, I would
Mm,
be reading it. And a bit of sci-fi as well. I mean, I did like sci-fi. I loved Star
okay.
Wars and laser guns. And this is back when there were only 3 Star Wars films, and that was all you got.
Yep.
So space fantasy and that kind of thing. That was just my jam. Games Workshop stuff, loved it. Read a lot
Mm,
of Games Workshop tie-in things. And I think I drifted away in my 20s from reading in the same way.
mm.
Um, to the extent that well, before we were married, but when we moved in together, we had been living together for a year and a bit, I think, when my wife went, "Oh, you read then?" Yes. Yeah. So I've always been a reader. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, you read quite a lot then. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes. So I did get back into it in my late
Mm,
20s. But that kind of that imprint of my teenage reading, especially, childhood of there's only so much orc and goblin you can get, followed
mm,
by teenage going like, I will take everything. And of course, that included Pratchett. So I
yeah.
don't know how old I was. I would guess I was 11 or 12 when I read, I would assume The Color of Magic, I think was my first Pratchett. And after that, I was reading them as fast as they were coming out. So
Wow.
the notion of parodic fantasy, or fantasy sends up, was deeply ingrained in a kind of, because those early books especially, they are
Mm,
pastiche, they are making fun of Conan the Barbarian. They're making fun of
mm.
all of those kind of tropes that you get in fantasy.
Yeah.
And I never wanted to write anything like that. I always wanted to write, a proper story. But I
Right.
wanted to, I'm going to say rather grandly, I wanted to deconstruct the tropes my own way.
Mm,
And that's what led to the Black Hawks. But then the Black Hawks and the Righteous are just two parts of the same story. It is one story split across two books, which is why I know
right.
some people complain about the ending of the Black Hawks, because one of the tropes I subverted was a sense of narrative completion. I think that. Um,
Well,
so
quite we'll just call it a cliffhanger.
there might be a bit of a cliffhanger. And then, of course, the second part being delayed by COVID was really irritating because I was telling people when the first book came out, don't worry, you've just got to, a year
Right.
at most, and you can read the second part. Like, no, it will in fact be basically 2 years. So,
No one could have predicted that, though.
no,
No one
no,
could have
well,
foreseen that.
it's publishing. But that then led to Tales of the Plains, which is basically being
Mm,
invited to write more stories in the same world.
mm,
And originally I was thinking, well, I finished Articles of Faith, I finished Black Hawks and the Righteous. those characters are done.
Mm.
But I left quite a lot of loose ends. Indeed, there were actually more loose ends in the back of The Righteous than there would have been, because I was ready to complete the whole story while we were still in edits for the second book. And then the publisher said, wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't you like to write more stories in the world? And I talked with my editor at the time, and the editor's suggestion was like, maybe some of these characters whose story come to an end could be left a
Okay.
bit more open-ended, just in
Right.
case you need them. So
Just put a pin in that.
you know, we did perhaps unkill one or two people.
I'm sorry, but I've never ever heard an author say that. Usually they're like, "No, I kill my darlings," and they stay dead.
I was very prepared to sort of to draw a line under the whole thing and go like
Right.
dead, 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 dead,
Jeez.
missing.
No
And
mercy.
they were like, how about instead, not dead, not dead, missing question mark. Like, okay, fine.
Right.
But then when it came to it, it took another year for us to decide what the next books should be. And having thought originally like, oh, it'll be sequels, so we'll keep going with the same characters. Like, do I want to do that? Do I want to do that? And I decided I didn't. I wanted to tell a new set of stories in a new part rather than just sort of treading the same ground again.
Yeah.
Which meant I then didn't need most of the characters that were still. So yeah, I did. However, in that time, I did work out what could have happened. So, should the opportunity ever arise, I can write a like Black Hawks 3 and 4 and possibly 5, because I do
Oh, wow.
have skeleton outlines for it. So I could tell you what would happen. But those were
Okay.
not the ones I actually wanted. What I wanted to do was transpose sort of north again, because I was subverted. So tedious. It's all southern hemisphere, so when you go
Right.
north, it gets hotter. And the last part of The Righteous takes place on the edge of this sort of great plain, which then leads to mountains and deserts and things like that. And because I had sort of finished in this area and opened up a bit of the world, you could sort of see it on the horizon. I was talking to my agent, and this would have been around, I would guess, 2019, maybe 2020. And he'd been playing a lot of Red Dead Redemption 2. And he
Yeah.
said, what about fantasy westerns? Fantasy westerns? Yeah, Red Dead Redemption 2 is amazing. Do a fantasy version of that. And I thought,
Yeah.
And then I sat with that thought for about a year. And then the fact that I had this sort of cod western landscape that you just peeped over the horizon towards the back of the second book. And I was quite interested in what made a western, because, generally a western set in the wild west of America, like, yeah, but what makes it? What are the defining characteristics? And it's that sort of that frontierism. We're far from organized systems and states, and law
We
and
make our own
order is
laws.
exactly that.
Yeah.
And the landscape is harsh and unforgiving. And the people who come out here are generally not here because they were having a lovely time back home,
The
So
outcasts, the dregs of society.
exactly.
Yeah.
And the fact that I could set this thing up, one of the things that hangs over any Wild West stuff for me is, the specter of colonialism and genocide. And I'm like, well, how about we just push that all to one side and we say, this is a fantasy world, so we can recreate the ethos of the whole thing. We can create the feel of it, but we
Right.
don't have to worry about all of the tangled historical horrors. We can invent our own new tangled historical horrors, but they can be as we need them to surface the plot. So
Right.
I took some of the developments of the kind of the back half of the first series and said, well, let's play with this. What would this mean if instead of this thing being a one-off, this became normalized? What if, we have a big siege and then, bad things happen, but the goodies win, or do they? Ooh, question mark. But what if that had massive geopolitical repercussions? And what if that led to a breakdown of law and order? And what if that in turn led to the rise of kind of para-state organizations? If you are a centralized kingdom and order and the state break down and you have to start up your own things, then what if essentially a corporation steps in and asks, hey, would you like us to provide you with law and order for a
Yeah.
very reasonable fee? And then you can start to play with that kind of, we'll look at the libertarian ethos of, every man's an island, protecting just them and theirs, versus, well, how do you actually cope in an environment where there are no roads and hospitals, and an infection might kill you? Well, you're going to need some sort of community. And what happens if that community is provided by an extractive entity? And oh, look, politics. So
Yep.
suddenly I had, this is what I want the third series to be about. I want it to be about, in some ways, the function of state and what is it that defines civilization, for want of a better term.
Right.
But that's the sky painting, if you like. That's just the, what's it called, the skybox in a 3D game.
Yeah.
The characters that anchored it in the middle were fundamentally an offshoot from the first series.
Okay.
Where it's a very small thing. If you've read the first series and you read the second series, you might not even know there's any connection at all. But what I wanted was to take a character and say, what happens if you have, a standard fantasy, like strong female character, and she goes on maternity leave? Because
because that happens.
This doesn't come up very often.
Nope.
And again, this is me trying to subvert tropes again. I'm like, what happens if you have a situation where someone who has only ever cared for themselves is suddenly having to care for somebody else? And obviously, the central dynamic of the Hunters is you have someone who is incredibly capable, but has spent many years on the run and is having to care for a child that she has come into the possession of.
Yeah.
And is not a natural maternal caring figure, but wants to do the right thing. And that in some ways plays back to, the central premise, I guess, of Articles of Faith was, it's all very well saying you want to do the right thing, but how do you know what the right thing is?
Yeah.
And the characters, I think, I don't like writing that kind of the morally gray, oh, so dark gray.
Yeah.
I do want characters who are trying to do the right thing, but often what their view of the right thing is at cross purposes with everybody else around them.
Yeah. And well, you also add in the extra layer of dealing with parental roles, right? And this is something that I wanted to talk about too, because that's, not a very common theme that's explored in fantasy. Usually the parents get gone
Yeah,
and it kind of goes off on their own and we get to see the kids' journey. But you add on to that the layer of someone who is trying to do the right thing, fumbles along the way. And that's a real big part of parenting. You're trying to
yeah,
do the right thing for your kid or kids, and you're never going to get it right because each kid is different. The circumstances are always going to be different. You can grow and be like, "Yeah, I can deal with that situation now. That situation never comes up again."
yeah,
You never get
yeah,
another shot.
absolutely
And
that.
I love how you navigated the parental role in The Hunters. Can you talk about that a little bit and how you tried to weave that in with the trying to do the right thing and this character who is very human? I won't say gray, but human because we
Yeah,
all make mistakes.
yes, and some of us can admit that, and others are less capable of doing so.
Yes.
So again, I think when I look at my second series, I see a lot of a kind of a mirror of the first series, a reflection of it. So when I wrote Articles of Faith, that is about, the main character is 19 at the beginning, but he lost his father at a very pivotal age. So
Okay.
he is kind of on a quest, although he's not aware of it, certainly at the start. He's looking for a lost father figure. It is that kind of,
Mm.
I want this mentor to be my new dad.
Right.
He does not say that out loud, and I think
No.
the notion would have horrified both of them had it ever been put to them. But that's basically what's underneath. He is looking for someone
Yeah.
to live up to the image he has of his father, and part of the conflict in that comes from the image he had of his father was obviously extremely rosy and ill-formed, and then
Yep.
B, no one in life is ever going to be actually capable of living up to ideals that don't survive contact with reality. So that clash is kind of fundamental to the first series. But for the second series, between, I mean, I wrote the Black Hawks 2015, so we'd had one child by then, and the second one arrived pretty soon afterwards. So children are tremendous obstacles to getting anything done, as you all
Yes.
know that way. And the smaller they are, the more time they hoover up. However, you do at least know where they are and what they're doing.
Mhm.
As my own children have grown, my own kind of, I don't know, once again, a bit like the way you shape your thoughts through practicing a lot of writing and learning things. Obviously, parenting shapes your thoughts as well. I have a whole lot
Yeah.
of unquestioned thought processes, which are just completely normal for me now, which would have astonished me, the me of 12 years ago,
Yeah.
pre-kids, whatever else. So a lot of the dynamic between Ree and Giovanni, who are the two main characters in Tales of the Plains, I think stems from my own kind of, when you're in this situation, you are trying to look after a child. There is a child over here who I can still, I mean, I was a nightmare kid. I know that now. I'm nothing like having your own children to give you sort of almost Nam style flashbacks to your own childhood and be like, oh no.
New perspective.
Yeah, I think it's fairly common for newish parents to be apologizing to their own parents for
Yes.
everything they put them through. But I can still kind of identify with 12-year-old girls. People can read the wrong thing into that, but reimagining what I was like as a
Mm.
know-it-all 11, 12, 13-year-old,
Mhm.
especially when I now have a know-it-all 11-year-old in the house. And yeah, it's a constant source of joy. But creating then a
Yeah.
kind of a dangerous world, as we talked about,
Mhm.
very low in law and order, very low in institutions, very low
High
in,
stakes.
yeah. So the protection that you would want to extend, I mean, these
Mm.
days you don't want to take your kids to a playground that doesn't have some kind of soft matting underneath the play equipment.
Yeah.
When you put them into an incredibly dangerous fantasy world that is full of scorpions, cobras, and bandits, and miners' guilds who are avaricious and extremely dangerous, you
Yep.
think, how the hell do you look after a small child in that situation? And then let's dial that up by having a small child who does not wish to be looked after, who is absolutely exhausted of being told no, and who
Mhm.
has learned all of the wrong lessons from their parental figure in terms of, here's how you deal with the situation, here's how you can manipulate people, here's how to steal, here's how to lie, here's how to get away with things.
Different survival techniques.
Exactly that. So,
Yeah.
the parental figure has become a source of learning, but not the learning. It's the classic do what I say, not what I do.
Yes.
Why
Brilliant
won't you
strategy.
just exactly? Why won't you just sit still and be quiet? And like,
Yeah.
well, because you never sat still or were quiet, so I'm going to go out and I'm going to mimic you. And Rhea
Yeah.
and Giovanni are, in personality, temperament, all the rest of it, they're very similar. And I'm doing the edits on the third book at the moment, and without wishing to spoil too much, there is a 2-year gap between the second book and
Okay.
the third book. So by this stage, Giovanni is in her mid-teens.
Oh, that's a
Um,
lovely stage, especially for young
yeah.
girls.
So yeah, as I said, I tend to structure my books around arguments,
Yeah.
and there are many such inflection points in the third book. So that the whole
Mhm.
thing is, yeah, it's building to a wonderful crescendo, I would say, at volume and nothing else.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because there's so many different facets of parenting that you can delve into. And like you said, you kind of just you take a child and parenting and put them in this very hostile environment and now say,
Mm.
"Okay, fly." Um, see how it goes. But then there are other facets to parenting, which is, the parent having complete control. A
Yeah,
child is young. They can keep whatever secrets they want from a child. They can control what they hear, where
yeah,
they go. They can plan everything. The child has to do what they say. And you get to this stage, and that's where I say it's fun in the teenage years. mainly because you get to this stage with kids where they say, enough. I want I want some power here. I
Yeah.
need something because I'm not an accessory to be carried around. I'm a person.
Yeah.
And that whole kind of dynamic of being seen as an individual, not just a, okay, survive another day and we'll see if you come home for dinner, is, is a completely refreshing way. Refreshing way to look into a story because I feel like that type of relationship is also very sorely missed
Mm.
in fantasy. It's a missed opportunity, in my opinion, because you have, for me as a reader, talking about your own reading, read when we were kids, we're now grown up. We're the nerds, geeks, whatever you want to call us that love fantasy, but we're now not getting that representation the
Yeah.
same way we loved seeing back when we were younger, the
Exactly.
chosen one who was in the young
Yeah. Do you
age.
want to keep reading about 17-year-old farm boys going off and
Yeah.
being starry-eyed about the world? Or, yeah, do you
Yeah.
want someone who's in sort of their late 30s, early 40s and's got a bad knee and
Yeah,
it's
Bilbo
just,
Baggins was great for
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Wanted to stay home and have
yeah,
tea and eat.
exactly
But
that.
but being
And
able to
trying to keep a child safe for
yeah,
you, but that's safe. Like safe from what? Obviously,
gotta read to
scorpions,
find out.
cobras, etc. But dangerous ideas as well. And
Yeah.
then inevitably, the best laid plans may turn out to have terrible consequences for the unforeseen.
Yeah, so it's refreshing to see that people like yourself are now writing these stories with these characters, these stages of life in mind,
Mm.
because I love seeing tropes flipped. I love seeing the differences and creativity that authors bring to stories, and this is just one of those things that I thoroughly appreciated in The Hunters, and I'm looking forward to reading with your other series as well. Now, in terms of your writing, I would
Mm.
love to know what has been the most important thing for you when writing, apart from subverting tropes and things like that. When you're writing a story and trying to capture that excitement and experience that
Mm.
you have while writing it and conveying it to a reader, what's the most important part for you?
I think that's sort of the disappointingly practical answer is routine. Like routine is the
Interesting.
most important thing for me to force myself not just to sort of concentrate for an individual bit of writing, but to
Mm,
structure my life around getting books written.
okay. Yeah.
And I have a sort of an internal refrain that I will use if I feel my concentration is drifting or my focus is not on what it should be. And it'll be, this doesn't get books written.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, I'm like reading some Wikipedia article about a thing tangentially related to a thing tangentially related to something I was researching. And I'll just be there like, oh yeah, when did Alice in Chains actually get together? And it's like,
So not
they're originally glam rock. I didn't know that. They're like, what are you doing? This is
yeah.
time you can be using to develop your work, and you can't waste it. Being I have a full-time job
Yeah.
because obviously writing does not pay very well, it turns out, unless you are, I guess, Brandon Sanderson or cloned from him.
Yep.
Um, so I have a job. I have
Yeah.
kids. I have a family. We have many animals, and I am apparently expected to spend some time with them. Which again, I don't remember signing anything, but there you go.
Yeah,
So
it comes with the
yeah,
whole choice.
yes, it's all in the small print somewhere.
Yeah.
So I do have to be quite focused about when and how I write. And the notion of
Mm,
kind of, oh, I've just got 45 minutes on a Sunday. I'm like, whoa, I'm not in the right frame of mind for this. I can't.
right.
No, my writing is weeknights, Monday to Thursday, and it'll
Interesting.
start as early as possible and keep going as late as I can, depending on when I have to get up the following day, basically.
So I'm really curious now because I am this type of person as well. And just from the way you're describing this, are you also the type of person that needs a set space for set task?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. That's what I thought.
This is my space. Yeah. I don't, I mean, so we're currently, we're looking at our eldest child for some sort of, ASD or ADHD diagnosis.
Right.
We haven't I haven't really dug very far into it, but looking over some questionnaires, and I'm looking at that going, how much of this applies to me? And how much
Yeesh.
certainly would have applied to me as a kid? Because I was a hyperactive nightmare as a child. I know that
Yeah.
now. I was vaguely aware of it at the time, I think. So less hyperactive, don't move around anywhere near as much, but the rest of it, maybe, I think. So a lot of the time I am kind of not tricking myself, but putting up the, sort of blinders like draft
Yeah.
horses wear, where you have to keep focused on the thing in front of you, and
Yeah.
then get your brain bouncing, because again it's that sort of bouncing off what you're trying to do. Like, I want to sit down and write,
Mm.
but I'm not really in the mood. I need a cup of tea. I want to write. Oh,
Right.
I haven't checked that email. Oh, I should reply to that thing. Oh, I need to get that birthday present for so and so. I'm like, and now it's only half an hour to bed. Is it really worth it? Like, you can lose an entire evening like that
Mm-hmm.
if you can't get your head into what it is you're doing. And that's still something that catches me out periodically.
Right.
And I need to get into the headspace of, what am I writing? Where was I? What
Mm.
thoughts were in my head when I stopped? Can I pick that
Yeah.
up again? A bit like, flipping the laptop lid back open. Can I just
Yeah.
resume where I was and carry on? And I've heard suggestions like, stopping a sentence halfway through, or never get to the end of a chapter or the end of a scene. Always leave yourself midway through something so you can just pick it up the next time you write. It's never
Right.
worked for me. It itches. I can't do
Right.
it. If I know I've got stuff in my head, I'll just write until it's all gone. And
Yeah.
then I need to go for a walk. I need to go to and from the station or something, and just be thinking in my head, like, this is my active thinking time. What am I going to
Right.
write when I sit down? So
Yeah.
the excitement for me is often the thoughts I have when I'm out and about, or God knows, thinking of things over in the shower or whatever, and suddenly going like, oh, wouldn't it be good if, or what
Mm.
if that character had to die? And real kind of, shocking, gasping moments that are utterly meaningless to anyone within 100 miles of me.
In a
Like, I'm the,
cafe, and
the
people are like,
only person, and I'm going like, oh, I've got goosebumps.
yeah.
And again, wife looks up from a margarita, like, "You're right, dear."
Just gotta go right quick. I had a little note.
I have a thought. Yep, got to write the note, write the note, write the note, and
Yeah.
again, still learning after many years of this to put enough context in the note so I will know what the note means when I come back to it in a couple of days.
Yeah.
Too often I will write myself notes. I'm like, I'll know what that means, and then I'll be staring at this sort of three-word combination of like, what does that
Yeah. Oh, that would be frustrating,
mean? Hmm.
especially if it was a really good one. In terms of, because you talked about trying to balance everything and making time and setting a routine,
Hmm.
you said you have a lot of pets. How many pets do you have?
It's not that many in the grand
Okay.
scheme of things. So we started with two cats,
Mm.
and then we got a dog, and now we have two rabbits. And
Oh my
I was talking
gosh.
to my daughter earlier today, and she said that she'd like to get a rat or a parrot. She worries if we got a
Okay.
rat, then one of the cats would try and eat it. She's not sure about a parrot.
The
She yeah
mm.
she has ambitions.
I feel like the parrot would be more of a risk than the rat,
Yeah.
just as someone who has had those pets and cats at the same time.
Yeah, I think, I'm fairly comfortable with the sheer number of animals now, but I don't
Yeah,
think I'd like to increase it.
that's
It's
understandable.
just a lot of toes.
Yes, well, and then you have your own children to take care of. You and your partner, your wife, you have to navigate all of that. You have 2 careers that you're working on top of it
Hmm.
all. So in terms of time management and trying to find all this time and then take the notes like you said, where do you find time to rest and recoup? Because that's an important part of the process as well.
Yeah. So, I need quite a lot of sleep, I think, again, because I'm quite
Mm.
massive. So, like, the larger organisms need more sleep, I believe. Me and elephants sleeping sort of 13 hours at a trot. So I do spend a lot of time tired, which I resent.
Mm.
Um, I try to keep weekends free from both writing and work, and
Right?
then concentrate on that as where I can as like relaxation time. And
Right.
occasionally I have had days off work where it's been like, I'm not going to try and write today. I'm going to do nothing but play Spider-Man on the PS2.
That's
Or
awesome.
PS4 maybe, I don't know. However, I do exist in that kind of, I don't know what the term for it is exactly, but that kind of the semi-professional creatives time off nightmare, where you finally get time off from your job, and then you think, well, I better make the absolute most of this. Great, I've got a week off work. I better get a load of writing done. And
Yeah.
that kind of, I've got to maximize the opportunity because I don't know when I get another shot like this. Or
Hmm.
turning around edits or something, where you've got a deadline and you think, I don't want to be sweating and staying up late at night. I'm going to take some days off work. And then you get to the end of the year and you're like, wouldn't it be nice to have some days off to go on holiday? And like, oh, I don't have any time off left. I've
Yeah.
used it all for edits and conventions and writing related things, and
Yeah.
play
That's a
Spider-Man
vicious
possibly.
cycle.
Yeah. I mean, I'm spectacularly lucky, I have to say, in like how supportive my wife is and how
Mm.
she just does so much for me, for the kids, for the family.
Yeah.
And I could not survive without her. I certainly couldn't write in the same way.
Yeah.
And I am incredibly grateful. But we have had some slightly awkward conversations about like, are you going to take time off to look after the kids at half term? And I'm like, I was going to use that time to go to a convention and then do some edits.
Yeah. It's
There isn't really a good
tricky.
answer.
Well, it's hard, right? You're trying to do and working 2 jobs is difficult, then trying to balance the family stuff on top of all of that, extra difficult. I know my husband does the same thing. He tries to balance the 2 jobs and then spending time with us. And there's a lot of and it's always figuring it out together as a team is what it comes
Mm,
down to. You figure it out together as a team, and as long as you both are open and talking, you're not just like, "Oh, no, my bags are packed. I'm leaving tomorrow," kind of thing, then I'd say you're in a good spot.
yeah, I hope so, and long may it continue. Certainly.
Yes, exactly. That I think that's the goal of many people in life is to find a partner, that will be supportive and be there for them, be communicative, and just be a good team at the end of
Yeah,
the day. And so, I want to jump back to your characters, if that's all right,
sure.
because I do have 2 burning questions, and I'm going to make you pick between your darlings, considering you had no qualms about killing them. So, um,
Only some of them.
So, okay, all right. I just always hear the maniacal laughter whenever authors are like, "Oh, yeah, I
Yeah,
killed a few of them,"
I
in the
am.
background.
I prefer not to generally. I mean, I've been
Yeah.
told off by editors in the past for pulling my punches.
Oh,
Because I don't like bad things to happen. I don't even. I
right.
mean, certainly with the third book edits, I've been told I've got to make
Okay.
some of the arguments nastier because I don't want them to say anything they'll regret.
Right. All right, that's fair. I'll have to put you in the category of kind authors, not maniacally evil. Um, so in terms of your characters, did you have one that was your favorite to write and come back to?
Yes, yeah. It's Lemon, the one we mentioned earlier.
Yes.
Lemon is a sort of, I don't know. I mean, she's fantasy Scottish, which is again just the classic trope, the notion of the sort of the Scottish fancy dwarf. I mean, she's not a dwarf. She does have red hair,
Okay.
and she does carry around a series of sort of iron tools, like hammers and axes and tongs and things, and generally clinks when she walks. But she's got an interesting perspective on things and a way with words,
Mm.
um, generally using sort of specific vocabulary where for uses that it's not quite designed for. Um,
Okay.
but saying inappropriate things is the kind of, it's the court jester, like the one person who is pointing
Mm.
out the madness of the situation or is expressing the unsaid.
Right.
So just, having that person in there, where you know two other people are having a very heated moment, and then she'll be there, the one in the corner, just sort of saying, well, this whole thing's ridiculous, everyone's going to die anyway, why don't you just kiss, that sort of thing.
Right.
um that's not a direct quote, I'm not doing her justice here, but it's that this character is both funny and punctures the moment fairly regularly.
Right.
And then where do you go with a character who's initially a sort of shock value, I suppose, in terms of I cannot believe that person just said that. Monocles dropping out everywhere. And then actually developing her as a person with a history,
Right.
with, her own arc, with wants and needs and all the rest of it, and then sort of taking her all the way to the end of the series
Mm.
was quite fun for someone who was not just like a comedy sidekick by any means, but someone whose primary function in the narrative was to be one of a crew where that's the funny one, and not funny
Mm.
as in, they're always making gags, they're so zany. Funny as in, like, there's something not right about you, that kind of
Yes.
thing. A source of a lot of humor, but
Yeah.
not humorous.
Yes, I see what you mean. So, on the flip side, then, which character was most difficult for you to write?
Yeah. So I've wondered about this, and I don't think I've ever really labored over a character.
Okay.
I mean, one thing that I found is writing dialogue. I am fastest at, like, faster at dialogue than anything else.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
in some scenes that are just a sort of a two-way, three-way, four-way conversation, I will absolutely barrel through that, occasionally referring to my notes to everyone, forget this person needs to mention this thing, but just writing semi-naturalistic dialogue that doesn't take itself very seriously, where someone is trying to make a point, where someone else is trying to argue that point, and somebody else is just trying to make their lives difficult,
Mm.
comes very easy to me.
Okay.
And some of the editorial feedback I've had is, can you add some more dialogue tags so we can tell who is speaking, because this is just a wall
Of
of dialogue.
dialogue. Yeah.
Can you add some stage direction type stuff so we can keep track of who's where and what they're doing? So
Yes.
I try to do that sort of thing. I have just, in book 3, there is a scene that features 7 people arguing for about a page and a half when none of the speakers is identified. But I like to think that from the way the voices are written, you
Mm.
could tell which one was which and what they were saying. But I did also have the thought that my poor narrator is going to have to read that out at some point. So maybe I was going to cut it down to 2 or 3 voices and identify them. I
Right.
haven't done that edit yet, so we'll see how we go. But as a result, characters and dialogue, I mean, where I haven't got a clear kind of grip on how a character sounds,
Mm.
and I haven't sort of got a precise zeroing on how do they say this thing,
Yeah.
then that does slow me down, because I'll just have to put sort of placeholder dialogue in, which tends to be very sweary generally. And then I'll come back through and be like, they don't need to swear here, they can say it that way. Which again, I mean, I think that shows growth, perhaps.
Mm.
But some of the characters delight in words, others delight in saying as little as possible. And
Yeah.
once I have a clear kind of, I know how they'd say that, I know how they would do that. If you ask them yes or no,
Mm.
that one would just go, not telling you. It's
Right.
that.
Cheeky about it.
Yeah, that sort of thing. And you get that
Mm.
again, in that instinctive, like, I don't have to think about this, because although these people are not real, they are all essentially sort of facets of my own personality put through a
Mm.
kind of a transformational chain to
Yeah.
try to create, like, if I were a 13th century mercenary who had continually lost every battle he'd ever fought in, despite winning like all of his own individual fights, I might have a bit of a chip on my shoulder.
Yes.
And I might, have a whole load of received wisdom about things. But then when somebody asks me about one of my actual individual battles, then maybe, I'd fly off the handle, that kind of thing. And that, like,
Right.
how do they feel? How do they react? And how do they talk? And getting the how they talk part generally makes them quite easy to write.
Mm.
And
Having a conversation, basically.
so there have been characters where I haven't quite got a handle on them as I've been writing them, which has made it harder. And I've
Right.
known as I've been going along, this isn't, we're going to have to come back to this. But
Okay.
then second way through, like, that particular character, oh yes, I think I'm going to make him into, I don't know, like a rugby bore, like someone who would stand at the bar in a rugby club after a game and be going like, oh, like, yes, that voice matches your personality, matches your kind of place in this world.
Yeah.
And now I can picture that. I can picture
Mm.
you standing in a blue blazer going like, well, you see the trouble with foreigners. And like,
Yeah.
that's, yeah, that's the guy.
And the
And
voice
now it
gives
doesn't
you humor.
matter. exactly that. So I can
Mhm.
now, when I come to write the dialogue, it's all coming through that sort of toothy, like, ah,
Yeah.
and I can rewrite the lines. Imagine, so yeah, who knows? The narrator can do what she likes with the whole thing, and readers reading it will get,
Yeah.
their own sense. But if I have done a reasonable job through like the rhythm of the speech, which you may not even be aware of as you're reading it, but you'll get a
Yeah.
general sense of kind of this character uses short words and is very to the point. This
Mm.
character will not end a sentence unless he is physically forced to by another character.
Yeah.
That kind. And we'll just keep going, 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 and that's the one that's based on me.
Okay. And it's interesting how you come about that process because I imagine when you're trying to figure out these characters, you have to ask a lot of questions. Same as you were doing with the world. What if? What if?
Mm,
What is this person going to sound like? How is their mental image that I have in my head going to impact their personality or vice versa? And another thing that you do, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's a theme, but another attribute in your story, at least in The Hunters,
mm.
that I found fascinating was you wove in the power of stories and legends while balancing character arcs and world lore. How on earth did you how do you balance all that without giving it away too soon? Do you know what I
Um,
mean?
yeah, yeah. I think so. I'd like to say that I just planned it all and then wrote it, and it was just nailed on. The answer is going through it over and over again,
Mm,
um, working out little ways. Because initially, I mean, I wrote a whole spiel of kind of Aki and Anash's
yeah,
lore, like the sort of the I wrote the creation myth. I wrote lots of sort of names of demons and things like that. And then as I was going through the book, having those two in scenes, you could refer to things and be like, oh, and maybe Aki could make some allusion to, oh yeah. And then, I mean, that wasn't there the first time. And then the third time, the fourth time, you're kind of like, I think I've got enough of it now in their thoughts, in their
mm,
words. And, we can dial it back a bit here. I thought I needed a lot more of it there, but actually, we've said it three times at this point. So the reader's got it.
right,
We don't need to go quite so heavy. And then, and then at the end, I can add a line where, and then
right.
suddenly you've got that kind of tie it
No,
all back. And then I'll just put the thing in right at the beginning just to put that line out there. So that can then be
right.
matched to the thing I've already written at the end. And now I look like a genius. Don't tell anyone I've given it away. But I mean, it
No,
really is. It's that kind of thing. It's
yeah,
just sort of multiple passes through. I
okay,
mean, I don't necessarily mean like reading the book from start to finish and then adding one line
right.
at a time like a 3D printer or something. But it's it's more hopping around and then thinking about it in a kind of how much of have we mentioned this thing enough? And editorial
Right.
feedback in this is vital, or beta read feedback as well.
Yeah,
It's you can't just drop something in two-thirds of the way through. You've got to be mentioning it up front. You've got to be reminding people, and then you can have a thing appear. And then if you're clever, you can bring it up again in a second way, like, oh, remember that.
yeah.
Fix what?
I I'm always fascinated by it because there are so many different things you need to pay attention to.
Mm,
Like you said, you had to do multiple passes to and put them in very specific spots to make it work and not feel repetitive, and still put that in combination with our characters and not, letting things get too out of
yeah.
hand, too, off the rails. So I really appreciated that because I was like, "Oh, there's that was was that foreshadowing?
Yeah.
Maybe? Mm? May okay, we'll put a little note there, we'll see. We'll find
But
out."
there are, I mean, I think with a lot of, I don't know, for other writers, maybe they do sit down and they say, I'm gonna write about a particular theme.
Mm,
I want to do this theme, and I want it to be maternal figures and lost
right,
daughters or whatever else. And so I'm going to construct a central relationship, and then I'm going to have secondary characters who are an inversion of that relationship, and I'm going to show that in another facet from here with this relationship.
right.
And that I ended up with all of that stuff, but it wasn't. I think I was sort of subconsciously aware because again, without giving too much away, Aki and Anash are looking for their mother, or
Mm.
the sort of the legacy of her life.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, Giovanni's wondering about her own parentage, and then Ree's got all her stuff going on, and then you've got other characters who maybe have interesting relationships with their own mothers. And that
Yeah.
stuff gradually kind of got layered in as well. Hey, wait a minute. If I make this, if I change this relation or make this relationship explicitly a kind of, oh, he's not just driven by this, he's also driven by that. And suddenly
Right.
we have another dynamic to this thing. So it kind of, I knew, having created the setting of like, I want the setting to be, dangerous and wild and blah, blah, blah. And I want the
Mm.
people, but that's there to create a pressure cooker for the characters. And the
Right.
characters, the central question is always going to be, about familiar relationships.
Yeah.
And so by chucking Aki and Anash in there, you're going to have a kind of a whole sideways to this thing that would otherwise just be, this bit in the middle.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
speaking using very specific terminology, so that anything else you can spot, like a magpie looking around and going like, that can also be tied into the theme, and that can be tied into, that can be
Mm.
tied into the theme, which I think it's fairly common. Ironically, though, having said that, I'm not that kind of writer. With this one,
Yes.
26th of August, everyone. 26th, 29th. God, I can't remember. 29th of August.
29th. So time to read
That,
The Hunters before you
yeah,
get into
absolutely.
the release of book 2.
Grab the Hunters on paperback. You can blaze through that in the next month, and then you can pick up the Spectacular Heart. It's an incredible. I don't know if you can see it from here, but the
It is
cover
beautiful.
wraps all the way around.
I love when authors
See,
and artists work that out.
yeah, amazing group. Yes, Gavin Rees and Emily Langford are the art team for that. They deserve all the credit, not me. However, I'll take it. When it came to writing that book, though, the irony is I did actually want to explore a specific theme.
Okay.
I wanted to dig into pacifism
Interesting.
because Chell, in the original series, in Articles of Faith, has an aversion to killing. I mentioned he has a lot of very strongly held ideas, and
Mm.
some of those ideas are untethered from practical experience, you might say. Like
Okay.
he knows a lot about stuff that he's never actually encountered himself. So when he is
Mm.
finally out in the world, meeting these grizzled freelance mercenary types, he spends quite a lot of time telling them they're doing it wrong, that
Mm.
they're not living up to the ideals, that his father would have done it so much better, etc. That is the kind of annoying little git he is. So there are a number of fights. Chell does not want to kill anyone, thinks killing is unnecessary. However, he is quite violent with his fists, and does not shy from a fight, and has a tendency to headbutt people. In fact, his name comes from the Czech word, I think, for headbutt. I mean, it's not directly, but it's
Related.
there's a related thing, yeah. Which is something I think I was dimly aware of when I was naming him. But I did see some of the feedback I got from the Black Hawks was like, I don't understand why you made your character a pacifist.
Okay.
He's not a pacifist. Like, he believes people shouldn't just be killed because they're inconvenient, which is again
Mhm.
an argument that he has with the mentor character, who is very, very pragmatic, grimly pragmatic in that classic, who is very morally grey.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we don't kill this person, then he'll just come back and kill us. Like, well, I don't agree, and that's about 700 pages of that. But I did think I was left sort of puzzled by that, going like, that's not what pacifism is. Pacifism
Right.
is not fighting and not killing someone. Pacifism is refusing to fight. It is essentially going, do what you like. I won't
Yeah.
fight back. And I was so struck by that. Like, what happens if you take this all the way through? What happens if you did have a group of true pacifists trying to exist in this fantasy world I've created? This
Mm.
incredibly unpleasant, dangerous, chaotic world.
Yeah.
Can you have a group of people who only want to live in peace, to be left in peace, to just
Yeah.
live happily and not fight anyone? Like, can you make that work? And
Mm.
then what if into the situation where you have a group of pacifists and a group of people who have maybe not got their best interests at heart, and then you drop Rhea and Giovanni into the middle of that, like
Yeah.
ripples in a pond. And yeah, and they then start to affect events.
Right. Shenanigans ensue is what I
They
like
very
to.
much, yeah, they very much do. So yeah,
So
that is the company of the wolf.
I like that you take the passive help, passive
Pacifism.
thank you, pacifism theme on that because it actually reminds me of Avatar: The Last Airbender. I don't know if you've watched that
Oh,
TV show?
my kids have, and I've tried to watch it with them, but they
Okay.
insisted on watching most of it when I was at work and elsewhere, which was
How
extremely rude of them.
dare they? How dare they? Well, I would definitely recommend watching it. It's, to this day, one of my favorite animated
Mm,
shows, and part of the reason that it reminded me of that is you have the main character, Aang, who is raised as a nomadic monk, but
mm,
part of that is being a pacifist, but he's put into a position where he has to save the world, and that also puts him into a position of he might need to stop the bad guy in a way that conflicts with his morals and what he was
yeah.
raised with. And so the way that the creators of the show navigated that whole theme, more so in the final season,
Mm,
but throughout as well, because he still has to fight people. People are coming after him because he's got a giant literal arrow on his head saying, "I'm the Avatar, come get me." He has to deal with these conflicts and these fights and how he navigates it along the way up to the big baddie at the
mm.
end was so fascinating to see how do you do that? How do you take a pacifist and put them in a very aggressive situation and then not, disrupt their like, completely make them a different character than what you set them
Yeah.
up to be?
Oh, absolutely. And that, I mean, that was what I wanted to do with the second book. And then it
Yeah.
from there it was obviously Rhea and Giovanni. I know about the whole. We are going to develop their relationship in a new situation. They've both been through a lot in book one. They're
Yep.
about to go through a lot more in a different way. There are
Lovely.
growing themes of, obviously Giovanni's got greater independence. Rhea is still trying to understand, come to terms with any number of other things.
Mm.
But then you have a situation where both of them as outsiders can look at it and go, this is a mess. Like, you are
Yeah.
pretending everything is fine. It is clearly not fine. And if you keep pretending, it's going to get worse.
Yeah.
And that is basically their pitch. And then you have on the other side of that, you have the people who live in this community, all of whom have arrived there differently, in different ways, at different times, and with different reasons, but who all are agreed that living in peace is the most important thing.
Mm.
And that's the sort of question of like, can you continue to be peaceful if you've got somebody standing next to you, just poking you all
Yeah.
the time, going like, can't get angry, can't get angry, can't get angry. Like,
Overstepping those boundaries.
yeah, how much of that can you put up with? And
Yeah.
obviously, because people are different and different
Yeah.
histories and different temperaments, you are going to see a sort of a graduated response. So I wanted to, in assembling that kind of cast of characters, I wanted different outlooks and different attitudes and reactions, and
Yeah.
really a sort of a scale of devotion to the cause, which is ultimately like, if you swear your entire life as a pacifist and then somebody comes at you and they're about to stab you in the eye, do you just
Yeah.
let them? Um,
Or do it to
and
someone
that's,
else who's right beside
yes,
you, right?
exactly
Because
that.
that protective instinct is strong in many
And that
people.
then becomes the dividing line,
Yeah.
between sort of who's going to go. But it has also allowed me to write, I think, my favorite baddie of all time.
In
Um,
book 2?
in book two, yes.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
when when you read that, you will find. I mean, he's absolutely disgusting. He is probably the character I have written I have hated the most. Um,
Oh, okay, I
which
love
is,
I love those kind of characters where you
yeah,
wanna slap them through the pages.
yeah. And in some way, I couldn't wait to write the ending. So it's like just I wanted to get to the end of the book and write a
Yeah.
section onto the page, and then like, because it was, the whole time up to that point, it's like, this is he's horrible.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
yeah, that, I mean, I'm quite pleased with that, because generally most of the baddies I have had up to this point have, that classic sort of everyone's the hero of their own story. They're,
Yeah.
generally speaking, they're just people who are in a given position, and maybe they are morally weak. They are possessed of sort of very little
Yeah.
self-control or whatever else, but they've created a rationale, they've self-justified, and they're doing what they're doing for what they're claiming is the right reasons, even though obviously for everybody else,
Yeah.
then they're not a good outcome.
Yeah.
And again, obviously the antagonist in the Hunters has very strong motivations for doing what they're doing.
Yep.
However,
Deplorable things.
and it is dressed up a certain way, and
Yep.
underneath it is, far less far less edifying. But there is at least, you can kind of construct a narrative where, like, this person isn't necessarily evil; they're just weak.
Right.
This guy, evil. No,
Yep.
absolutely evil.
A hard line right
Yeah,
there.
yeah. So just a colossal monster.
Yeah.
So I'm really pleased to have written someone like that. And now for book 3, I've just gone back to, like, look at these ridiculous people. The villains in book 3 are they're a bit of a come down because they're not evil. They're just very rich, spoiled people with an awful lot of power and absolutely no real constraints on them at all. And
Yeah.
I don't know where I get my ideas, I've got to say.
They appear out of nowhere.
Mm,
And that's part of the reason I love stories is everyone's method to coming. How did I come about the story? What inspired me? Like I said with the process, it's all so different that it is fascinating. And as a reader, I'm blown away with how vivid authors make these worlds and the characters. And then you're like, where how did this all fit in their brain? Like, how did they how did they come up with these
yeah,
ideas? And that's where I'm so incredibly grateful to be able to have the opportunity to host these interviews and ask those questions and try and find out. So I absolutely appreciate you sharing all of this. It's phenomenal. And I'm going to ask you one more question before we sign off here because I know we're
sure.
at the almost the hour and a half mark here. But in terms of what you would recommend for anyone who is watching now or later in the replay, what book would you recommend they read outside of your own? And you can only pick one. I know it's such a hard choice. I hate when people ask me this, and yet I deal it out anyway.
Yeah, yeah. It's really difficult to answer this question because I think
Mm,
different books have meant the most to me at different times in my life.
right.
One of the most pivotal books I read, I think, as a teenager was Good Omens, Terry
Mm,
Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. And then years later, I finally saw The Omen, the horror film, and just went, "Oh, it all comes from that." And I had no
yeah.
idea. But that incredible mixture of sort of light and dark and humor and horror and just footnotes and everything else. That was my favorite book for years and years and years. But
Okay.
think I think I'm going to say The Goblin Emperor.
The Goblin Emperor.
The
That sounds
Goblin Emperor,
familiar.
Catherine Addison. So
Okay.
it's, I don't know, it must be 2015 or so. It is about a kingdom. I'm going to get this all right. A kingdom. He immediately says the clue is in the name. It's an empire, which is made up of different provinces. It's very highly stratified, and the emperor and his heirs die in an airship crash. And all the people who live there are a mixture of elves and goblins, but they're all essentially the same kind of people. It's generally a skin color type thing. Um, because all of the heirs die in this air crash, the unloved kind of back end of the family tree, this fat fella called Maya, who is living in disgrace somewhere, is suddenly the only surviving heir and is
Oh,
elevated to the imperial seat, to the absolute horror of pretty much everyone involved in the court. And
yeah.
Maya is a thoroughly decent person.
Mhm.
And that's basically it. Now, the book itself, and it has some follow-ons as well, which follows some a secondary character from the Goblin Emperor and another couple of other stories set in the same sort of land.
Okay.
The use of language can be a little overwhelming because it's the first book I've read for a
Oh,
long time that uses thee and thou correctly, um,
Really?
because it uses thee and thou for informal speech amongst people who are friends or family, and
Right.
it uses you for formal speech in a way that would be obvious if we were, say, speaking Spanish or Japanese, because of course
Okay.
there's the difference between the polite you form and the informal you, which we have lost in English, but we did have with thee and thou. So
Mm,
you can tell from the way people are talking to each other what sort of terms they're on. The titles everyone is given, basically, the longer a title, the more honor the person should receive.
right.
But the words are sort of constructed, they get longer. I can't even remember, sort of min, osmin, dak osmin, that kind of thing. And, they
Yeah.
get longer and longer for the higher somebody is in social rank. But the whole
Wow.
story is essentially about someone who was never intended for imperial politics and backstabbing court and all the rest of it, catapulted right into the middle of it and not losing sight of who they are.
Mm,
And it's, I just think it's a really lovely book because it's about someone who is trying to solve problems by being nice and, again, doing the right thing. I know we've talked about that umpteen
yes.
times, but, acting with a genuine conscience, a set of morals, and trying to steer through what are incredibly dangerous waters.
Yeah, that's, it's endearing, but you're basically throwing a fish into the sharks from
Yep.
that kind of situation.
Yep.
And I think I found the cover here. I'm gonna see if I don't know that I can get this to work, but the cover is fascinating. I don't know if this is a new cover or not, but it has, like, the kingdom on top of a crown. Is that the
Now
right one?
the one I've got, I can see it up here.
Is it,
The painting.
Catherine
Oh,
Adams, right?
yes. Yes. So the
Yeah.
one I've got has his little head poking
Yeah,
out on top. Yep, that's the one.
that's it.
There
Yep.
are other covers, but they're not as good.
Yeah. It's always the classic covers that are better, aren't they?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
in terms of where everyone can follow you, stay up to date with news and upcoming books, where's the best place for everyone to find you?
So best place probably my website, which is daveragg.com, DAVEWRAGG. There's a mailing list as well, and I promise I will only send out maybe 3 emails a year because I know people get you start emailing them every week, they get upset. I do
Yeah.
not do that. I do the opposite. I am on Blue Sky at It's Dave Ragg, and I am still, God help me, on Twitter, despite everything. I wish I could not be, but it kind of gets on you. It's like glue, and then you just can't wash it off.
It's where so many people are as well still. It's hard
Yep,
to
yep.
leave when your
In
community is still
spite
there.
of everything, yeah.
Yep.
So I wish it could be otherwise, but it just not.
So, book 2, The Company of the Wolf, is coming out on August
Yes,
29th.
29th. I'll
So,
get that
folks,
one.
you have time to read The Hunters, which is book 1, and if you burn through that in 2 days, like I think I did, you have time to read the, first series, The Black
Yep.
Hawks and Righteous, as well before The Company of the Wolf comes out. So, lots to check out from David here. Thank you so much, Dave, for going in depth with all of this and sharing your process and the thoughts you had behind everything that you've created. I thoroughly enjoyed The Hunters. I'm looking forward to your first series and, of course, the sequel because you got to have more of Ree and Giovanni because that was a great journey with them in the first bit. And I'm really curious to see what you do with I'm going to mess it up again, pacifism. There we go. Did it
Bang on.
with that theme as well because it's very interesting and very difficult, I imagine. So I'm looking forward to it. But
Well,
thank you
thank
so
you.
much again. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. It has been a pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. And for everyone watching now on the replay, make sure you go down to the description, check out the links for Dave's website, follow, read the books, and as always, take care of yourselves.